Big Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Big Apple Blitz. What's going on? Matt O'Leary with Anthony Rivardo. Anthony, how are you, my friend?
Doing good. I'm excited. The Giants are kicking off OTAs today, so finally getting some footage of the boys back on the practice field. Really exciting time to be a football fan.
Absolutely. Jets, same thing today. They posted a video of Garrett Wilson walking out on the field. I don't think reporters are allowed to watch this practice, but tomorrow they are. So I'm hoping for by the time we're back around on Thursday for the next show, we get maybe some storylines to talk about. I know they're only in shorts and helmets, but it's still football. It's close enough, right?
It's close enough, and it's just enough to get me excited. So, seeing guys like Malik Neighbors finally out on the practice field and, having some of the other players just be out there and start to build their chemistry, the clips that we'll get, maybe there will be some fun one-handed catches from Neighbors, whatever. It's enough to get me excited and get me going for football.
Now, the real question is, are the one-handed catches going to be coming from Daniel Jones or another quarterback? Because I keep seeing, again, this week, we talked about it not too long ago about like, hey, maybe it's not written in stone that Daniel Jones is the starter. And then I believe it was Connor Hughes, who covers both the Jets and the Giants for SNY, who had a quote about the Giants starting quarterback spot as well.
Yeah, Connor Hughes essentially said that the Giants quarterback depth chart is written in pencil, meaning it is subject to change. And the Giants are, of course, still expecting Daniel Jones to be their starter. They're planning on him being the week one QB1. But there is an element to this summer where we could see this turn into a competition. And I know that there's also some pieces being written today about Tommy DeVito talking about how he feels like he's starting at square one again and he wants to compete and make sure that he solidifies his roster spot. So the Giants quarterback room is just going to be really interesting to keep an eye on all offseason. How is Daniel Jones going to perform coming back from this ACL tear? Is Drew Lock really going to push him for that starting job? Will Jones even be healthy for week one? And then what happens with Tommy DeVito? Does he continue his Linsanity run? Does he get back on the field at some point this season? It's all going to be really interesting. It's a total mess. It's the last thing that I want as a Giants fan is to have your quarterback room in a mess, but it is going to be probably the most intriguing storyline throughout the offseason. So as we continue to get more breadcrumbs from reporters like Connor Hughes, this thing just continues to heat up and get more interesting.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I would imagine that Daniel Jones is the front runner to win that spot. And when it's all said and done, I wouldn't be surprised if Daniel Jones is the week one starter. But we talked, again, another thing we hit on recently in one of the episodes was probably a very real chance you see all three quarterbacks or at least two of the three quarterbacks this year for the New York Giants. But for Drew Lock, I don't know. He looked okay in a couple starts for Seattle last year. He won a big game against Philly. I'm sure you're happy about that one. They won 20-17. He threw for a touchdown. Again, didn't put up massive numbers in either of the two games. He had 2 picks in a loss against San Francisco the week prior in a game that he had to start for Geno Smith. But an upset win over the Philadelphia Eagles, kind of hanging around in that game, kept them competitive. I think you kind of sign up for that after, unfortunately, what Jones regressed to last year.
100%. And you mentioned it there. It's the Philadelphia Eagles that gets you so excited. The fact that Drew Lock was able to step in and perform well against them just kind of gives you some hope that if he does see the field and he does have to face some of our division rivals, well, he has some experience finding success against the Eagles. And any player that happens to kill the Eagles, get a come from behind win over them, or just embarrass them in any way, I love him. So huge fan of Drew Lock for that reason alone. Also, he has a very cool nickname that I probably can't repeat on the live show, but love Drew Lock. Think he's always been a fun personality in the NFL. And again, to have him on the Giants, hopefully beating up on some Eagles players next year, should be an exciting time.
You never know. And it's funny that it ends up being Drew Lock from the same quarterback class as the Daniel Jones one. I know one of my good buddies who's a big Giants fan, Drew Lock was his guy, and he wanted Lock over Daniel Jones and was kind of upset that Jones went that high. And, things didn't really work out for Drew Lock in Denver, backs up a couple years in Seattle. And Daniel Jones has been the starter for the Giants with varying degrees of success. But as we've mocked here for the last few weeks, the vaunted year 6 leap for Daniel Jones, we're not sure if it's coming.
100%. And I do want to just keep pointing out Tommy DeVito exists. I feel like he's just been forgotten about because, obviously there was so much conversation this offseason about the Giants trying to go after Drake May, maybe McCarthy. They didn't do any of that. They're sticking with Daniel Jones, whether they want to or not. He's probably their starter. Bring in Drew Lock for competition. But I think that Tommy DeVito is competition as well. And I know that's probably a hot take, but I think that as a UDFA who didn't have a whole lot of experience, was really just thrown into the mix out of nowhere during the middle of that regular season, his ability to fight through that adversity, find any type of success that he found, whether you want to say it was within a system, he was holding the team back, I don't care. He won football games. He made some really good throws. He played some decent football down the stretch. I think that anyone that just counts him out is too hung up on the fact that he's an undrafted free agent. I made this argument during that stretch too, had a first round pick gone in because of injuries and made the throws and made the wins that Tommy DeVito made in that final stretch, all Giants fans would be saying future of the franchise, do everything you can to build around him. He is our quarterback. But because he was a UDFA and there's these advanced analytics that people like to use against UDFAs, everyone just says maybe he'll be a backup if he even makes the roster. But again, like I said, this was a first or second round pick that stepped in and had that kind of success. Giants fans are talking about him like he's the second coming of Christ, and that's not happening for Tommy DeVito. I don't think it's completely fair. He showed an ability to compete at an NFL level. He should at least be given a backup roster spot on this team, and I do think that he should be in the mix to compete for that starting job if it does become available through the regular season.
Yeah, you're right. Like there is some inherent bias where a quarterback is taking these guys. And Jet fans have seen it for far too long. Guys like Zach Wilson got a crazy long leash because he was a number 2 overall pick, where someone like Tommy DeVito unfortunately doesn't. He gets, a couple, back-to-back tough starts against the Saints and the Eagles. And it's like, all right, that's it. Like it's over for Tommy DeVito after, a nice 3-game run. And you don't know, like it very well could be that he's just a backup level quarterback, but the good news is you'll probably see a lot of him in the preseason. I would imagine. They need these quarterbacks to eat up, time in the second halves of these games. And I don't know. What do you think their plan would be for Daniel Jones in the preseason coming off the injury? How much or how little would you expect him to play?
I feel like he's not going to play, but I feel like he needs to play. Like how much rust is going to be on him? He wasn't playing particularly well last year. Again, I just think it's wrong to hand him the starting job because of his contract. And that's essentially what it's going to be. He was not playing at a starting level last year. He was not playing well enough to secure himself this job for the future. The injury is the only reason really that he still has the job, because everyone's just going to say, well, the situation was bad around him when he was playing and then he got hurt. So just chalk up the whole year to a mess and give him a pass on that one. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's fair to the other guys on the team. And I do think that he needs to earn the job back in the offseason and prove that he's capable of being the starter. And I think a lot of that has to do with playing in the preseason. But because he is coming off of this injury, it's very doubtful that we see him in the preseason, because I think it's going to be a very close call for him to be healthy at the start of the regular season. Now, I know that he has said publicly to the media that he's going to be ready for training camp. What else is he going to say? Obviously, he's going to tell that to the reporters. And also, I think there's an element of the fact that risking re-injury is going to keep him off of the field during the preseason due to his contract. But again, if you're holding this guy off the preseason field because of his contract and the injury clause and the potential risk of re-injury, why are you putting him on the regular season field where he's more likely to get hit and more likely to sustain an injury that adds your cap hit by another $23 million in the following offseason because of that clause? So this whole situation really is a mess, like I said. But what we see from Daniel Jones throughout the summer will obviously tell us whether or not we see him in the preseason or regular season. But I would assume that we don't see him until week 1. And even then, I'm not feeling confident in a quarterback who didn't play any preseason, barely practice all throughout the summer in week 1.
Yeah, and on top of that too, like when you did see him in the regular season last year, unfortunately, he wasn't very good. He had one good game against Arizona. Like that's the standout one where he had 321 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. But I mean, Dallas in week 1 was rough. Same thing against San Francisco and Seattle. Gets hurt against Miami, and then comes back and gets hurt against the Raiders, like almost instantaneously, but wasn't looking that great in that Raiders game. So I think you're putting a lot of faith in him if you're kind of just handing him the keys right back again, without really getting him much run in the preseason or training camp.
Yeah, and you're being kind there. He looked terrible in that Raiders game. It's not that he didn't look good. He looked terrible. He was missing throws. There were passes that could have been touchdowns that he missed into the sideline, like uncatchable, or he underthrew. He played very poorly in that game prior to the injury. The offense, in my opinion, moved a little bit better when he was out of the lineup. And overall, just throughout that season, again, even that Arizona game, it was a good half. It wasn't even a good game that he played. It was a good half. The Giants were down by 20 points at halftime. Daniel Jones was playing bad football. He was missing throws left and right. Had a great second half. Brian Dable, the rumor is, the conspiracy theory is, he took over the play calling duties from Mike Kafka for that second half and led the charge to that comeback. Daniel Jones obviously was the vessel that got them there, and he played great in that second half. But that was the only flash of football that we saw. And again, that's my point. He's a former first-round pick. He was given this contract, had a great half of football, so people still believe in him. Tommy DeVito gave us 4 good games of football, but as an undrafted free agent, no one cares. So I don't know. I just think there's so much bias that gets played in, like you said. Zach Wilson, it happened with him. Darnold, Daniel Jones. I mean, the year 6 leap that we always joke about, the leash that this guy has is unbelievable. He needs to have the shortest leash in the world going into the summer, in my opinion. It's do or die right now. And like I keep saying, it's not good enough for him to be good enough because of that injury clause. He has to be a great quarterback this year. Otherwise, he's done. And everything that's gone into this prior season and leading up to this offseason, I don't know how he ends up having a good year based on everything that we've discussed. So it's just going to be really, really difficult for me to get behind Daniel Jones and really believe in him as the future starter. But I'm a Giants fan at the end of the day, so I'll root for him. I'll root for the team, and hopefully I'm wrong, but I think everything indicates this is going to be another tough year.
I know you're going to love this because it's something that I've heard a lot from the Zach Wilson truthers, and I'm sure this is what gets thrown at you for the Daniel Jones truthers is, well, the offensive line is terrible. Like I'm looking at his box score numbers and I'm looking at the sacks. 7 against Dallas, 10 against Seattle, 6 against Miami. While it's true that for both teams, the Giants and the Jets had a really, really bad offensive line. For the people at home, Anthony, can quarterback play also impact the offensive line and these sacks? Like quarterbacks can take these unnecessary sacks, which seems like a foreign ideology to these truthers.
Believe me, they 100% can. Quarterbacks do sack themselves. Quarterbacks do hold on to the football too long and apply pressure to themselves. And if you want to find the stats on that with Pro Football Focus, I'm pulling it up right now. I know that Daniel Jones had a very high percentage of sacks responsible, or he had 20% of his dropbacks that he was pressured on, he was responsible for. If you compare that to Tyrod Taylor, 13.9%. That's a big difference. And Tommy DeVito all the way down at 11%. And that's so funny to me because everybody was talking about how Tommy DeVito was constantly applying pressure to himself and holding on to the football for too long. Well, according to the advanced stats from PFF, he only applied pressure to himself 11% of the time. 82% were based on his offensive line. Daniel Jones, though, 20% of his pressures he accounted for. So he doesn't get the football out of his hands. He makes the offensive line look worse. And this is when we always talk about quarterbacks have to elevate the talent around them. Daniel Jones is not capable of doing that because he doesn't read and process the field quick enough, and he doesn't get the football out of his hands. So he applies a lot of pressure to himself. So yeah, you make an excellent point there. One that I have really slammed the table for and tried to get across to some of my viewers over on Fireside Giants. It's not just the offensive line. The 85 sacks that they let up that year, well, according to PFF and I think one other outlet, forget what it is, 45 of those sacks were responsible for the offensive line. The other 40 were from the Giants' 3 quarterbacks. That's a lot of sacks given up or surrendered by the quarterbacks themselves. So quarterback play definitely affects the way that the offensive line looks, as I know a lot of Jets fans are familiar with as well. But Daniel Jones notoriously throughout his career has applied a lot of pressure to himself.
Absolutely. I got a couple from Tony here that will bang out. First one is Anthony, over under 6.5 Giant wins.
I'm going to take the under. I would love to take the over, but I think it's going to be 6. So I'm going to have to take the under.
I agree. I think 6 is the number. Maybe they get it to 7, but 6 and 11 kind of feels right for the Giants. And then he follows it up with over under 9.5 for the Jets. I think based off both of our response to the schedule episode last week, I think we're both hitting the over for the Jets here, right? At 9.5.
Yeah, I'm definitely hitting the over there. I think 10 to 12 is a realistic range for them. Again, only thing that gives me question, I don't know how fully bought into this coaching staff I am, but I'm fully bought into this roster, and they should be able to will themselves to 10 wins.
I'm totally with you. For the Jets range, I'll go 10-12, Giants 5-7. So maybe they do sneaking over with just squeaking by at 7 wins there. But anyway, kind of just wanted to go through and talk about the Giants quarterback scenario. I'm sure we'll do that many times this summer heading into the season, but there's a hype train going on right now with the New York Jets, and that's Jason Brownlee, the undrafted free agent from last year. Was known for some acrobatic plays around this time last year during OTAs and training camp. Ended up making the roster along with Xavier Gipson as an undrafted free agent, but didn't really get a ton of opportunity until the end of the year when they were healthy, scratching Allen Lazard. But Rich Cimini wrote an article earlier this week kind of talking about the Jets youth on the roster, and he mentioned Jason Brownlee by name as a player to watch. Not a huge year 2 leap, but kind of like maybe having a bigger role in this offense than we think. I would be surprised by this one, though. I think, Anthony, with the veterans that are going to be in front of some of these younger guys on this roster.
Yeah, it's going to be really tough for, I think, a lot of these back of the roster guys to compete for playing time on this Jets team because, as I've said, I think this roster is really stacked. A lot of talent in the starting lineup. I think there's quality depth. So once you get past that second, third string, really tough for those guys to get on the field, barring any drastic injuries taking over that wide receiver core. Like you mentioned, some of the guys that they add, Mike Williams is a big plug there for a hole that was on this team. And seeing a wide receiver like Brownlee really rise up the ranks and get that playing time, it's going to be difficult, but it's always important to have that depth because injuries are such a big part of the game. So having a guy who is playing well in practice and that you might feel like you can rely on and that Rodgers is developing some chemistry with, that's all important. When injuries arise, you want a guy like that to be able to step onto the field and make an impact.
Yeah, I'm with you there. The only thing that I will say where he has, I think, maybe a little bit of an edge in comparison to Xavier Gipson, who Gibson's kind of more just like your specific like slot guy. He's too small to play on the outside. And I think, Corley is going to be in that role a lot in the slot. I don't see him as an outside receiver. And then also with Garrett Wilson, yes, he plays outside, but the Jets also like to get him inside a lot. So I feel like there's kind of going to be a lot of competition for him to get up and get reps at the slot, where on the outside, I think you can kind of come up with a easier path. Like, for instance, Mike Williams is coming off the ACL. So if he's kind of, not fully 100% at the start of the year, maybe there's a little bit more opportunity. And then the only other guy ahead of him is Allen Lazard, who was a healthy scratch at the end of last year. I think the Jets are hoping he bounces back with Aaron Rodgers, but that's not a guarantee. So maybe that's like I'm trying to just come up with the reasoning in my head, like why could he get on the field? And as I kind of just laid out there, I think he has an easier path than Gipson, who's kind of just going to be only a slot guy because of his size.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And I will say, if you want to go over kind of that size profile, playing on the outside, 6'2", makes those crazy one-handed catches and has great body control and contested grabs, similar to Mike Williams. So maybe the Jets will actually just look at him as this insurance plan for Williams. Let's say Williams gets injured, re-aggravates his knee, or just gets banged up for a few games, not healthy in time for the regular season. Maybe Brownlee goes in there and just plays that role. I think that's kind of an important thing for NFL fans to kind of recognize, that those practice squad players oftentimes are there just to emulate what some of the starters do, knowing they're probably not going to go onto the field in the regular season. But for example, the Giants, a couple years ago, they had Kenny Golladay, obviously. They signed like 3 backup wide receivers early in the offseason that were just big bodies who were probably never going to see the regular season. But knowing that Kenny Golladay was dealing with some injuries, they wanted to have guys on the field who had a similar size profile and a similar playing style. So that way, Daniel Jones could throw the ball to a guy like Golladay for when Golladay gets back in the lineup. Giants also did that with Darren Waller and a guy, Lawrence Cager, similar story. So I think that could be one of the things that you see envisioned here for the Jets with Mike Williams, knowing his injury history, having a guy like Brownlee who could do some of the same things as him with that 6'2" size and that contested catch ability on the sideline. I think that makes a lot of sense for impact on the practice squad and in practice in general. And eventually, if he needs to be on the regular season field, there too.
Lawrence Cager sent shivers down my spine because I don't know if you recall, he was also a New York Jet, and he started week 1 of 2022 over Garrett Wilson and was getting manufactured targets instead of Garrett Wilson, who didn't really see the field until like the third quarter of that game. So like that name just like triggered something in the back of my head that I didn't want to remember. But it's a very valid point because you're right. Like, especially the depth guys and the practice squad guys or the scout team guys. I'm going to make 2 points here. Is one, you're right. Like their goal is to kind of emulate what they already have. So you have kind of like this pecking order. If God forbid there's an injury, someone could slot in. But twofold with this is at the end of last year, Aaron Rodgers was running the scout team when he, was trying to make the comeback and then didn't end up playing because the Jets were already out of it. He was running the scout team in practices, and he mentioned this offseason, like Zach Kuntz, who was a 7th round pick at tight end for the Jets last year, as someone he worked with. But in training camp, and I'm sure in those practices, guys like Jason Brownlee and Xavier Gipson were getting reps with Aaron Rodgers, which is beneficial to them going from, year 1 to year 2 with him.
100%. Chemistry is super important just for quarterbacks in general. I know, of course, as an all-star flag football quarterback, the chemistry that I have with my receivers really helps me on the field. So I can only imagine that it's the same for Aaron Rodgers and the guys that he throws the ball to. Having chemistry with the starters, the backups, everything in between, it is super important. And getting Rodgers as many pass-catching options that he's happy with is always important, which is why the Jets have been so willing to sign guys that he's friends with or that he likes their playing style. Again, all that stuff. I know we mentioned about how Mike Williams' playing style is just perfect for Aaron Rodgers and what he likes to do. And that's why we wanted that signing to happen. And we're happy that it did. And I guess you could make a similar argument for Brownlee and the way that he plays maybe just meshes well with Aaron Rodgers. And again, that could be another path for him to get onto the field.
Exactly. He's not going to separate well. He's not the best of route runners, but in training camp last year and OTAs last year, he made, just kind of going up and getting the football, making plays over someone in the secondary. Like, oh no, if there's, an injury to Williams and they need that red zone guy, I think he's someone who could potentially fit that bill. So we'll keep an eye and see on that one. Another question from Tony. I like this one that we could bat around. How do you feel about the 1-year contracts for the Jets and free agency and the lack of chemistry going forward? So I think the Jets used free agency this year to kind of band-aid some issues, like left tackle Tyron Smith you bring in, but you still draft Olu Fashanu as like the long-term answer. You trade for Morgan Moses, who's on the last year of his deal. I think that's kind of a band-aid fix, as in my mind, I think they want Carter Warren to eventually develop and be that right tackle who starts after Morgan Moses leaves. But beyond that, I don't really have an issue with what the Jets are doing. Like, they have this short, 2-year window probably with Aaron Rodgers over the next couple. I think they're just trying to maximize that while also having like this young core that they still have in, Breece Hall, Elijah Vera Tucker, Garrett Wilson, Sauce Gardner, all those kinds of guys.
Yeah, and I think it's a strategy that we see in a lot of sports in general, but we've seen recently in the NFL as well, where, there were a lot of 1-year deals and veteran acquisitions to band-aid things. It worked for the Los Angeles Rams. They won a Super Bowl doing this, making all these blockbuster trades. They had OBJ for a year, and he played great in the stretch of the playoffs and made an impact in that Super Bowl. Then he was gone. They had Jalen Ramsey for a short time, then they traded him after they got that ring. Things like that. Like, we've seen the Rams do it. We've seen other teams do it and find success with those 1-year deals just to kind of be in that win now mode. I mean, hell, even the New York Rangers are doing it, and they're doing it pretty successfully with some of their win now moves that they've made. The Jets are in a win now mode. And they have this perfect window with Rodgers before he eventually likely retires within the next 2 years. So I'm not necessarily worried about it because it's just kind of the risk you take where you gamble it all on the next season or two. And then after that, you probably have enough talent where you don't have to do a full rebuild. You just kind of retool the team and then you're good to move forward because there's still young guys on here building that chemistry. So I'm not totally worried about it. I think that this is the right play for the Jets, who, again, like I said, are in that win now mode and potentially a Super Bowl window.
And then a Giants one for you before we get to our next Giants topic, which is this the best supporting cast for a Giants quarterback in years? I think yes. I would lean yes with the addition of Malik Neighbors. How do you feel about it?
I would agree, absolutely, because I think that this offensive line, again, on paper, we don't know what it's going to look like in the regular season. We've sold ourselves this lie many times that this Giants offensive line is going to be better. But this time I do believe it. Like, I think that if Andrew Thomas stays healthy, I can't imagine John Michael Schmitz entering his second season is that bad again. Like, the kid has talent. He's going to take a step forward. And then, of course, the guards that we signed, we know are at least going to play at an average level. And it's really predicated on how well the right tackle position plays, Evan Neal or Jermaine Illuminor. But then the receiving core, it's so much better than it has been in years past. Hyatt going into year 2, you hope that he takes a step forward. Wan'Dale Robinson has proven to be a very good player. Darius Slayton, very consistent, very underrated. And now you have Malik Neighbors. Obviously, you lose some talent with Saquon Barkley, but again, you know the value of having an elite wide receiver, potentially Neighbors, is greater than having an elite running back in Barkley. So I do believe this is the best supporting cast for a Giants quarterback in a very long time. And that's why if Daniel Jones doesn't have that phenomenal year, the Giants have their answer for the future. So it's really, they've done everything they can to evaluate the quarterback position properly this go around. If there's no year 6 leap, you know what you got to do.
Let's get to some underrated guys on the Jets and Giants. PFF put out an article this past week about underrated players on both these teams. And for the New York Giants, we'll start there. Okereke was the answer, which I think is appropriate for this Giants team. Bobby Okereke was a really nice addition for them last year.
Bobby Okereke is arguably the best free agency signing that the Giants have made in the last decade plus. And they've had some good ones, honestly. Like Damon Snacks Harrison was a great one. Janoris Jenkins, Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie. Those guys were great for the Giants for a few years. But Okereke, the way that he just immediately transformed the entire defense overnight as just a one player, one signing, plus the value of the contract, 4 years, $40 million, $10 million per. Really great deal there. I mean, for the level of quality that they got last season, I think Okereke should have been an all-pro player. When you look at his stat sheet, absolutely stuffed up the box score. Interceptions, a career high. Sacks, career high. Tackles, almost a career high. Tackles for loss, a big career high. Past defenses. The guy did it all, and he really was the glue that held the defense together. And you could see the ceiling for this team just continuing to rise as he plays better and the Giants build around him. So we went like a decade plus without having good inside linebacker play. Okereke immediately stepped in and just fixed it. So love him. Think he's a very underrated player. I feel like outside of the Giants fan base, probably doesn't get a whole lot of recognition, but definitely deserves some more. Should have at least been a Pro Bowler last year. And I'm hoping that he continues to build on what he set out last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he did, as you said, he did just that. The Giants have kind of struggled at inside linebacker for a while now, and he really settled it down. 149 tackles, 2.5 sacks. The tackles for loss, 11. He was just flying around the field making plays. And he's still in his prime. You know, last year was his age 27 season, so he's going into his age 28 season, turns 28 in July. And I think is, going to be one of the leaders on this defense. He plays his role well, was a really good free agency addition. And I don't know, I think sometimes we see in free agency, like some of the older players end up getting overpaid, but you got someone in their prime at a fair market value deal. Like that's so rare to me in free agency. So a really good signing.
Yeah, totally agreed. The only other thing that I would say is in terms of the Giants' most underrated player, according to PFF, they went with Okereke. Definitely could have made the case for my guy, Darius Slayton. I know I've kind of talked about how underrated I feel he is on this show quite a bit, and on pretty much every show I do. I'm a big Darius Slayton fan, and I really think that he deserves more recognition, and he deserves some better quarterback play to actually let him go for 1,000 receiving yards, because I think the talent is there, the ability is there. Just the ability in terms of throwing him the ball and putting him in position to succeed hasn't been there. But yes, Slayton and Okereke are the Giants' two most underrated players in my mind.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Slayton's a good one for the offensive side of the ball. For the defensive side, and maybe overall, I would say Okereke. I think Okereke is a better linebacker, like in comparison to the rest of the league linebackers, and Slayton is a wide receiver. So I would lean with Okereke, but Slayton's is a good answer. Like he's just been solid for that team for a long time. So I'm good with that one too.
Totally agree. I think that, like you just said, in terms of relative to the rest of the league, Okereke is probably pushing into the top 5 to 10 in his position. Can't say the same for Slayton, but in terms of being a really solid WR2, I don't know if you can find much better than Slayton.
That's true. And for the Jets on this list, their most underrated is a popular answer, but it's DJ Reed. So obviously Sauce Gardner as cornerback 1 gets a lot of the recognition, and deservedly so, one of the best corners in the league, but his running mate DJ Reed also deserves some love too. Last year, I want to see if I could pull up his numbers from PFF on what it was that he actually allowed. It was, let's see, 100. Oh no, that's yard after the catch. Okay, 475 yards and 2 touchdowns allowed on the season. 61.4 reception percentage. I mean, that's really solid for a number 2. I wish these guys would get a little more interceptions. He only had 1, and Sauce did not have 1 last year. But 6 pass breakups. I thought he was good, and you can't ask for too much better at your number 2 cornerback spot than a guy like DJ Reed, who probably is close to a top 15 corner in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. He's definitely pushing up into that range. And listen, to have 2 solid cornerbacks like that is very, very valuable. Obviously, you've got Sauce Gardner, and he's going to attract a lot of attention, and that's going to create a little bit of a shadow for Reed to play under. But it's important that PFF highlights his performance, and like you're mentioning, very underrated. He's just a good guy, a good player for this Jets defense, and if he continues to play well with Gardner and some of the other pieces that the Jets added, like I said, I think this starting lineup from start to finish is pretty stacked and pretty much set at every position, and Reed plays a big part in that.
I have 2 other guys that stand out. I mean, on the Giants, we found the guy on offense. So I have a Jets guy on offense that I'm thinking of, but I actually think Reed is starting to get a little bit more of the recognition he deserves. So I don't know if I would call him underrated as much, but I think their slot corner, Michael Carter, is becoming the more unsung hero of that group. There seems to be kind of a debate, both guys going into the last year of their deal. Like if you had to pick one of the 2, which one would you rather? And I love DJ Reed. I just think as an outside corner, he's going to cost you more. He's a little older. Well, Michael Carter's a couple years younger than he is, and slot corners don't make as much. So I think they would probably choose him over DJ Reed. But again, like slot with teams going 3 wide as their base personnel more often than not, like you need to have a really good slot corner. And I think the Jets do have that in Michael Carter.
I do agree with you. The nickel cornerback position is just becoming more and more important and overlooked. So, yeah, in terms of someone being underrated, you might make an excellent point with that. And again, a lot of that is just a sense that NFL fans seem to not really value that spot, the slot cornerback. But believe me, NFL teams do, because it is such a pass-heavy league, and you see so much 11 personnel now. But I do have a solution here just to make things easier for the Jets so that they don't have to worry too much about who to extend. They can always just trade Reed over to the New York Giants for like a 5th round pick. I think that's fair enough value for our end. And, then we're all happy here, right?
One of us would be very, very happy. The other, maybe not so much. But the offensive guy, which I think might be a little bit of a hot take to some, because where we were talking about the draft a few weeks ago, but I think Tyler Conklin's actually a little underrated at tight end. He finished 11th in receptions for tight ends and 13th in yards last year. So I'm not saying he's an all-star or all-pro tight end, but I think he's a capable NFL starter. And as our guy Johnny says, with better quarterback play going to Aaron Rodgers, I think is going to have impact there.
Definitely. I like this comment as well. Rodgers elevating the wide receivers, kind of like I was talking about earlier. You've seen it with some of these Giants players, like Darius Slayton not getting his game elevated until Tyrod Taylor came in at the end of the season. Slayton elevated his game, or I guess Tyrod Taylor taking some deep shots did that. But yeah, pay Slayton. I think that he definitely deserves that extension. But Rodgers is absolutely going to be able to maximize the talent around him. And that's why I think you can be really high on a guy like Malachi Corley going into the year, where I think he's a prospect that was very much how good he's going to be is going to depend on the situation that he lands in. Landed in a great situation with the New York Jets. I think that they're going to be able to find ways to get him the ball, and Rodgers is going to play a big part in that.
Yeah, get Slayton a new contract. He deserves a pay raise and tack on a couple more years after that. I think it's best for both sides here on that one. So we hit on both teams' underrated guys. I wanted to talk about last kind of Jets story here. So we got some info on what the UDFAs are going to be making, like their guaranteed money. And I think that's usually a good sign to see like who has the best chance to make the team. So I was going to pull that up when we go through. Pictured here for the graphic is edge rusher Eric Watts, who got 245,000 guaranteed. Another edge rusher, Braden McGregor, got 220. The one that gets talked about the most, Leonard Taylor, I was kind of surprised to see him in at only 110. I figured he would have been higher up on this list, closer to where Watts and McGregor came in.
Yeah, I agree. I'm surprised that Leonard Taylor is that far down the list, but potentially that has something to do with depth at the position. Maybe they just like Watts better. They like who they have in their starting lineup on the defensive line. I guess that could play a role. Something similar to this did happen last offseason, though, with the New York Giants. Wide receiver out of West Virginia, Bryce Ford Wheaton, got like low-key a lot of money just to be on that practice squad. I think they fully guaranteed his practice squad salary to make sure that he was here for the entire year. He had a lot of teams that were vying for him prior to him signing as a UDFA with the Giants. So usually when you see a lot of guaranteed money like that, the player is going to make the roster or at least be on the practice squad and not go anywhere. And I think that's very valuable to have a guy that's going to stick around with you for the entire year on your practice squad. Again, like we were talking about earlier, having that depth, having that continuity there, very important. So a guy like Watts, very notable to see that much guaranteed money. But I'm in agreement with you. A little bit surprised about Leonard Taylor there.
Yeah, Taylor, again, a really interesting one. If you looked at mock drafts a year ago, was a first-round guy, and then a lot of people projected him even still as a fourth-rounder, goes as a UDFA. But I think this is kind of telling on the Jets' fourth edge rusher spot. So they like to rotate a ton, as it's been well documented, the Jets' defensive line rotation. And they have three edge rushers that I really like and I'm comfortable with in Hassan Reddick, Jermaine Johnson, and Will McDonald. That's a really nice top three guys. But after that, they're going to have, right now, the assumption is Michael Clemens, who put on weight last year. They tried to play him more inside. It didn't go all that great. So I think now they're trying to slim him back down and have him play on the outside. But I don't think it's a lock that he is that fourth guy. I do think his roster spot could be in jeopardy. And someone like a Eric Watts or Braden McGregor, two guys who got, a little bit of a bag here as UDFA, could maybe make the roster and push for that fourth spot in the rotation at edge.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And kind of unrelated, but related to this topic, could you imagine being a UDFA and you're only guaranteed $2,500? That's pretty tough, man. Like, I feel bad. You're seeing some of these other guys, Eric Watts, $245,000 guaranteed. Then you're Jackson Simon or Sermon there, and you've got a check of 2.5K. It's like, all right, well, that covers, my month's rent. Guess we'll go forward with that and hope to make this roster.
Yeah, that's tough. It's like in baseball, the minor leaguers who make like $10,000 on the year, and it's like, this is not ideal for those guys. It's got to stink, and you would have to imagine that poor Jackson Sermon probably doesn't have a whole heck of a lot of a chance to make this roster if they're only guaranteeing $2,500.
Right. Very unfortunate. Hope he keeps his day job, and I hope the same for a lot of these players that enter the league, that they actually do plan for their futures and not just, bet it all on the fact that their football careers pan out. But yeah, more related to the main point that you were making, it is very interesting to see who gets the money in this pool of UDFAs and seeing the contract numbers, and it'll be very intriguing to see who stands out in practice, who gets the run. Maybe you see Braden McGregor at some point earn some reps with the first team. That's usually an indicator that guy is going to make the roster at the end of the training camp period. So who knows? Maybe Jackson Sermon gets some reps with the first team. Shocks everybody. Totally possible.
You never know. It's always something that's on the table. But again, I wanted to pull up the look at the UDFAs and get into that because this is the first kind of look at it. As we kind of go full circle here on the show to bring it back to where we started. OTAs for both Jets and Giants start this week. So it's exciting time. Is there anything like, can you put any stock into this week? Like, are you going into it and be like, I want to see this from OTAs?
I want to see some Malik Neighbors highlight grabs. Just get excited about him. And I want to see, this is actually more of a real one. I want to see Daniel Jones. What's he able to do on the field? Like, can he stand? Can he run? Can he throw? Like, what's he doing? That's what you can put stock into as a Giants fan right now. You've got to see what you're getting from that quarterback position and the health of Daniel Jones. And we'll start to get some inklings of that now and see how he progresses throughout the summer and leading into the training camp period and regular season. But yeah, I think that's really the main thing for Giants fans to keep an eye on is just the health of Daniel Jones and where he's at during OTAs.
Totally fair. I think that's a good one for me. It's a very chalk answer, but it's those slow motion Aaron Rodgers throws. I just need those back in my life. I missed it. It was really fun, last year during OTAs in training camp, getting to see, him out there and making plays. It feels like we were robbed of that over a full season, as we know how short his time lasted in game one. So again, I get it. They're just helmets and shorts, but I want to see my quarterback out there throwing the football, please.
Totally. I can't get as much excitement to my quarterback throwing the football, but obviously, like I said, it's important to see if Daniel Jones is throwing the football and what he's able to do with this knee recovery and everything. But yeah, maybe we'll see some of those Aaron Rodgers slow-mo balls go to Brownlee as well and add some more intrigue to this offseason. That could be a whole lot of fun.
Absolutely. That's going to do it for us on this episode. Thanks for hanging with us a little bit later on this Monday, but we'll be back on Thursday at the regular time. That'll do it for us. Matt, he's Anthony, and we will catch you guys next time.